This is TWiT.
China. The topic is China.
And hold on. I would just like to offer a traditional Chinese blessing before we start.
May you live in interesting times.
Don't say
that. You're going to get us in trouble. I heard the word Hong Kong in there. We're going to get banned all over the world. And what does that mean?
It's just something I picked up in my Chinese class at Exeter.
Yeah, very nice. I didn't know you studied Chinese.
Yeah.
I know Mei Guo is America.
Yeah.
I heard Hong Kong in there, so I'm worried about what this content was.
All I know is ni hao.
Ni hao is very good. Hao hao,
That's it.
Zheng hao.
Oh, shishi. Thank you. That's it. That's all I know.
Apple, Google, both pulled apps from the App Store, protest apps after China complained. These are apps used apparently by Hong Kong protesters. Apple's memo, or Tim Cook's memo or letter to the Apple employees said, we did it because it was being used to target police. That is not the case, according to Apple blogger John Gruber, who quotes Maciej Ceglowski. Maciej, who is a software developer in San Francisco and created Pinboard and is a really smart guy. His blog is Idle Words. He has been in Hong Kong all this time, for the last few months, reporting on his experience, not as a reporter, not as a protester, but as a citizen. Really very good on-the-ground reporting of what's going on in Hong Kong. And according to Maciej, who was there on the ground, he said those apps are not used to target police. They show where police are grouped to warn people to stay away from there.
Away from police.
Yes. He says Tim Cook's assertion that we had to take it because we don't want to have an app in our app store that endangers police, which of course you wouldn't, is really just repeating the propaganda from the Chinese government. The NBA, I mean, it goes beyond tech. The NBA walking on eggshells with the Chinese government.
Blizzard.
And by the way, it's hurt both the NBA and Blizzard. Blizzard particularly, a lot of gamers have stopped playing World of Warcraft and other games.
And note well, one of the revenge tactics against Blizzard is to file GDPR complaints, because you have to answer them. So people are using GDPR as a weapon against Blizzard.
And they are using Mei, the Overwatch character who is Chinese, as a symbol for Hong Kong revolution. So
if you follow Maciej on Twitter, his Pinboard account, @Pinboard, he has written a post which talks about Tim Cook's letter, in which Tim says the app was being used maliciously to target individual officers for violence and to victimize individuals and property where no police are present. He says that is not the case. That's Chinese government propaganda.
Right.
Even John Gruber, who is normally, quite an Apple fan, says, I cannot recall an Apple memo or statement that crumbles so quickly under scrutiny for a company that usually measures, for Gruber to say this, that usually measures umpteen times before cutting anything. It's both sad and startling. By the way, apparently, according to the New York Times today, the Chinese government realizes perhaps it overstepped and is trying to damp down attacks on the NBA. Remember, they blocked NBA games from Chinese television.
This could lead, as strange as this sounds, and I don't want to sound like a tech determinist, I'm not. In a way, it could lead to revolution, in the sense that you take away people. If people don't know what's going on, suddenly they lost the NBA. They have to ask why.
My question is, what does Apple gain or lose in this scenario for them to
they gain 1.4 billion customers.
To the Chinese market, which is important.
Even Google, which isn't really a presence
Google,
in the Chinese market, has also pulled these apps from its Play Store.
That seems odder to me in that way because they don't have a presence. I think Apple always stands up as we're the virtuous one. They're all bad. Well, remember that, folks. But Google doesn't really. They've already been the virtuous one and left China.
So, and this is a much broader topic, and this is, you remember the whole clash of civilizations thing, in terms of East-West, that sort. I think what's happening is I don't even really want to talk about this because it's so hard to talk about rationally. We have different values and beliefs. And if you read a lot of stuff from Chinese Americans or even Chinese people who are familiar with America, there's very much a gap in how we view the world and what we value and what many of them value. And not necessarily like, hey, yo, I love people, being injured. I love the bad things, but they're this sounds so stupid, not further down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but when they look at government failures, they're much closer to it and much further away from kind of the Enlightenment ideals that we seem to have. And if you look at the world from that perspective, you see why much of the Chinese citizenry is okay with where they're at. It's not awesome. And when things get bad, they rise up and the government does pay attention eventually. Is it the best form? No. Is it utterly foreign and anathema to most people in the West? Yes. So
I have to say, I love Chinese culture. I love Chinese culture, and I think the world of it. I understand what you're saying, which is we shouldn't judge them on our cultural
well, I'm
biases.
just saying that these companies have to take a view that...
That's the question does the company, if it's an American company, if the NBA or Apple or Google, American companies who thrived under American values, but they want to go into other markets where those values are not honored in the same way, what do? Do they say, we're just going to honor the laws of the local society, whatever they are? Or do we believe in American values to the point where we either stay out of that market or whatever? We take the consequences of not...
Where's the line drawn?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Can I argue with the premise here? Because, Stacey, I've heard that argument a lot over the years, and I don't buy it for a few reasons. One, I don't think we have a proper sample. We have a nation that lives under authoritarian rule, has for many decades, does not have free flow of information, is scared of saying what they want, has a government that has employs thousands and millions of people who do nothing but censor their speech and put out disinformation. We have an educational system that's built around that. I don't think there's any reasonable, reliable way to say this is what the Chinese people think, number one. Number two is I think that Hong Kong gives lie to that view. Because even though, yes, it's from different roots and it has different rules and there's the British history and all that, it still is closely associated with China, and they're not taking it. Damn it, they're not taking it.
The very
small amount of time. Hong Kong is a perfect example of this playing out, this cultural dichotomy. It's not even a dichotomy. It's a battle that is coming into conflict. You can disagree. I mean, like, basically, I'm doing the same reading. I'm talking to people who are from China. But again, my sample size is admittedly small. And the places I read are, I'm not living there. So
just to be clear, are you saying we shouldn't judge China on our own by our own standards? They need to be...
I'm saying that it's complicated. And ideally, we will do things as tech companies to avoid absolute moral harm, right? So do you want to be part of rounding up, and I cannot say the population name, the Muslim...
Uyghurs.
Uyghurs?
Uyghur.
Okay, so do you want to be part of that and if you don't, and you want to draw a moral line there and say that we don't want to do business because of that, I think you actually have to question whether or not you want to do business here with the Trump administration and what they're doing with immigrants, right? Well,
that's an interesting point.
I think there
you can't pull out of every market.
It goes both ways.
Right. So I think you have to I don't think it's as easy as saying I don't want to.
I don't think what's happening in the United States is comparable to what's happening in China. Here's my concern about this, and this has to do with this notion of, and it's the same thing's happening in Europe, where there's a debate over whether European values can be enforced on the rest of the world. I worry that China, because its strong-arm tactics seem to work, is going to be emboldened by this. I was told a year ago, somebody said, I live in China. You don't understand it. What you don't understand is China's ambitions in China are different than its global ambitions. It needs to keep its population under control, but its global ambitions are not world domination in the old traditional communist way. It's maybe economic domination, or at least economic parity. But I don't know if that's the case. I think maybe it looks like the government under Xi is more interested in promoting that old-style communist notion. They certainly want to enforce their values on our companies, don't they?
They do.
I mean, the NBA, the general manager of the Houston Rockets tweets in support of the Hong Kong protesters, and China is up in arms and says, we're not going to run any more NBA games.
Would you call that enforcement of values, or would you call that enforcement of authoritarian propaganda?
That's what I'm saying.
So
that's not
they
values.
react so strongly because our values are almost the polar opposite of theirs. We believe in individual rights. We're very much, almost to a fault, very individualistic versus a collective.
That's true.
In their entire society is built around the collective. In a lot of our issues actually right now as a society stem from us being probably more individualistic than collective.
Yes.
So when we come in, we're both being arrogant, and we have this history of that, not necessarily as Americans, although a little, but even as people from the West coming over there.
Yeah.
And we're also, in Hong Kong's a special place because it was the British protectorate for so long. And that's where this is like a crucible for exactly what we're talking about, which is why it's so interesting and why we're geared to say, well, heck yeah, we're pro Hong Kong. That makes sense to us. These are people like us with values that are closer to ours.
The old saying about Hong Kong, one country, two systems. This was what the Chinese government said we were going to do. We were going to keep Hong Kong autonomous. That seems to be breaking down at this point. So that's where the trouble is.
And look at Taiwan as well.
Yeah.
Stacey,
well, look at Apple.
Apple
pulled the Taiwanese flag from the emoji keyboard in Hong Kong.
Yeah. When I have Chinese students, and I find, and again, very small sample sale. I have a sample sale. Sample size. Sample size. Thank you. And I have far fewer Chinese students than most other universities have. We don't have many here. But I've witnessed a couple of things. One, I've seen people. Maybe there's 3 different models, and I don't know which one is true. And my only point here is I don't think we can judge truth out of China because we can't hear people in their unalloyed speech. Some people say the system is bad. Some people say, I don't want to say anything because I don't know who's watching.
Right.
Some people say system is good.
And this is of your Chinese sample
that you have? The people? We have no way to know. No way whatsoever. So I don't think we can judge either way, in fairness to your view. But I certainly am not going to I still think that what we do know is that it's an authoritarian regime that tries to control people's speech and thought and treats various minorities terribly. And that I do think, to go back to Leo's original question, is when in doubt, follow your own values.
Well, yeah, what is the responsibility of tech companies? Here, by the way, let me give you, so Google was not quite so clear-cut. Google pulled a game called The Revolution of Our Times. This is what the game developer's own description says. Hong Kong was once a prosperous city protected by rule of law, but Carrie Lam, who's the current, chief government chief in Hong Kong, I can't remember the title she uses, has single-handedly destroyed everything by trying to pass a very controversial extradition bill while ignoring the wishes of more than 2 million Hong Kong people. She has tried to subdue the protests by deploying tear gas and allowing police brutality, but the people of Hong Kong have shown the world their unyielding determination by swinging their fists against bullets. She's tried to sway public opinion by deliberately allowing the enraged protesters to vent their fury in the Legislative Council, but the people of Hong Kong have stayed united. Now, some might say that's actually a factual description.
I was going to say, is it coming off as defamation?
That's pretty accurate, but Google's point is that it's against the rules in the Play Store to capitalize on sensitive events, this is the actual wording, such as attempting to make money from serious ongoing conflicts or tragedies through a game, and that's the clause they invoke when they pulled it, which seems to me actually to be
sounds legit,
about right.
Yeah.
Well, you could argue, is that a political, like, is a protest type thing? Does that fall under the same thing as like creating a game after Sandy Hook where you go shoot things?
Right. No. No.
What if they didn't charge for it? Would it still come down?
No, because
what if they put it up for free?
If it were free, apparently that would be okay. The game is free but has in-app purchases. If they took those out, apparently that would, well, let's see. Let's do it, and let's see what Google's response is. Because honestly, both Apple and Google are looking for loopholes. They're looking for ways to do what their Chinese masters want them to do, but make it appear to be according to their rules. Yes, masters.
No, it's markets. They have access to markets, and they want access to those markets, and they want money.
I mean, I'll tell you why I say masters. I think it's immoral and unconscionable for a company that survives and made its way thanks to the American way of life to tolerate that kind of behavior and to kowtow to that kind of behavior just because you want to make money in that country. It is not okay.
Our biggest export is unbridled capitalism, and they are performing it very well.
You hate America, so maybe you don't like. You don't.
They are the worst capitalism. They are amoral capitalism. That's not communism.
I think we have. I honestly think we have higher values than that. Maybe we don't always live up to them. Maybe we're not currently living up to them.
Right.
But I think that does not mean we shouldn't attempt to live up to them. And I think that our value is not make money at all costs. That is not an American value. You're saying it is, Stacey.
I think that is an American value.
Look at how we treated our environment. Look how we treat poor people.
No, I'm saying you hate America, so that's what you think. I think we should have a higher standard. Maybe we don't live up to it. I agree with you that many's the time we have failed. But I think it's
isn't it a bit hypocritical to call them to action for behaving this way and being incredibly capitalistic towards China when we allow the same sort of thing at home?
We shouldn't allow it at home either.
No. The unpopular American way is survival of the fittest.
So so what you're saying is it's okay to make money in China because that's what we do anyway. We rape the environment and we take advantage. We exploit.
There are moral areas here, but it's weird. It's silly to expect a corporate, like a company, to behave in a moral fashion when profits are.
It's all about profit.
Google pulled out of China when it was being asked to do things that would cost lives. They used to not
want to be evil, but we cannot look at Google today and say that they are still that same company.
Well, that's why I'm criticizing them.
Sent a man to jail to stay in the country, and got roundly condemned for it as well. They should have.
Yahoo.
Yeah, Yahoo. So I think we got an axis here. I think Leo and I are on one. Ant, have you fully put your?
All right, Ant. He's been staying well away from this. I don't blame him.
Well, I do agree with Miss Stacey on a point, far as just the
when you say it that way,
the way that I was only in China for a very short amount of time. It wasn't Hong Kong, but one of the things that I took away from my visit was it seems like the people were seriously patriotic about where they were. And I'm not talking about just the haves. I'm also talking about the have-nots. I'm walking the streets and you just felt this sense of pride. I don't care where I was, but you felt an insane amount of pride about where these people were and where they come from and their heritage. And it blew me away because I don't get that when I walk the streets here. I get a lot of people fussing and complaining about what Google is doing, what Apple is doing, what the IRS is doing, and so on and so forth. But walking those streets of China, it was totally different. There was smiles, and it's totally different, even though They couldn't check out what was going on YouTube and couldn't check out Facebook or what have you. But they were just.
But when you have people in China and Hong Kong fighting for their liberties and lives, and you decide it's wrong to tweet in support of them, and you know, as the Houston Rockets did, and or the NBA did, and you pull it down, is that okay?
No, it's not okay.
Well, bless your heart.
What about? Well, let's think about something like.
Not okay.
They
Let's
are
think
trying
about
to
Charlottesville
outspend the J curve.
All right, Carson's saying something important, I guess.
China.
What's the J curve, Mr. Harvard?
The J curve is an economic construct.
I know it is, but go ahead, tell us what it is.
Go ahead.
Basically, when you go,
bless your heart.
When you go from totalitarianism to democracy,
Okay.
There's a curve. It looks like a J, and basically you go through a period of horrible instability.
Yes, and China has absolutely done that.
And they are trying their best to get out of that.
That's a slump before you can climb out
They're trying
of the
to.
trough.
They have been for the past 100 years trying to spend their way out of this trough of the J curve.
And by the way,
And-
have done very well. I'm not criticizing what China wants to do or whatever, but I think for an American company to listen to the Chinese government's restraint on its free speech or its way of doing business is a huge mistake, because I think what you get as a result is an emboldened Chinese government, and that is about a lot more than climbing out of the J curve. I completely understand that.
This is what Stacey's talking about. This is
Well, she's saying we shouldn't judge them with our values, and then she hates America, so she's saying our values aren't so good either.
That's not hate America.
I know, but I like to say it.
We need a certain
Princess
amount.
Leia hates America, doesn't
We
she?
need a certain amount of
There's the show title.
totalitarianism to get us through this period.
Well, that's their rationale, and that may even be true.
It
But
is
why
true.
should we as America
If you look
support
at-
that? By curtailing free speech in America. Why should it come?
Why shouldn't they be able to support it if they
Because
are an
it's
international
practical.
company? And we can't
Because for
argue
one
that.
thing, we
Because
might
it's
put pressure
greed.
on them. Let's say this. Let's try this scenario.
If
So
you're a
let's say that
Hong Kong
basketball-
protester, how do you feel? How do you feel when you hear this country you're protesting against, with all the military might in the world, amassing tanks across the river from you, says to the NBA in the United States, which for whatever you think is still the beacon of liberty in this world, and says, this massive power says, you better not say anything bad about us, better not say anything in support of those protesters. And this American institution, even though basketball was invented in Canada, this American institution goes, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to offend. Screw those protesters. You're right.
I don't have to like it, but I felt.
Well, I'm just saying I don't like it.
Wait, hold on. When Google let Andy Rubin go with the $90 million payout after
I don't like that
sexually
either.
assaulted women,
Didn't like that either.
Nope.
I didn't like that.
And
but
he
you know
got even
what?
more money recently.
Yeah. But
Let me, Stacey. Let me
Well,
try to
let
answer
her
the
finish the
question
sentence.
anyway.
What?
something
I want to know what.
that's not something I can personally do anything about. I understand from a stockholder's perspective why it happened, and the outcry against it and drawing attention to it is what people can do. And here,
Well, that's what
we're
I'm doing.
That's what
I
they're trying to
don't
do.
have to say, stock shareholder value. I'm sorry, Google. I'm sorry, Apple. I'm sorry,
Google only
NBA.
has to
Stockholder
listen
value. You're
until it
absolutely right.
affects
I
their
can be
share
upset
price.
about it. This is what our job is. We're journalists. We're commentators. It's okay for us to say that's not okay.
right, and I agree that it's not okay.
Oh,
But
well, there you
I
go.
also understand that we don't have. I mean, like, I understand why Google's doing it. I'm trying to understand why
Oh, I do too.
in China, why China's the way it is, and I don't think
I understand that too. They're trying to. I think Carson's not wrong. They're trying to dig their way out of the J curve, which they've been trying to do for since 1945. How many?
I don't want to interrupt
exercises?
Stacey, so can I raise
Go
my
ahead.
hand?
Go ahead.
2 points. One, Stacey, one answer to the question, I think, is let's say that the NBA hangs tough, China hangs tough, suddenly no basketball in China. That could have an impact. It's like Western television had an impact in East Berlin, right? It could have an impact in the country that yes, it's our values, but we believe in those values. And maybe it's imperialistic to think this way, but freedom, I believe in freedom. And if we can help freedom in China, I would call that a good cause. That's point one. Point two is let's take China is this mysterious culture we don't understand, so we shouldn't talk about it this way. So substitute another culture that I think is doing heinous things, like Saudi Arabia chopping up a journalist. So, you know, if the same arguments were made there, say, well, but Google's got to make money and Apple's got to make money and the NBA's got to make money and they're going to be in Saudi Arabia, I would be screaming my head off about those companies and telling them to sod off.
Actually, you should be, because the Saudi Arabia Sovereign Fund is a massive investor in many of the unicorns out of Silicon Valley. A lot of the money that's running Uber and other companies is from Saudi Arabia.
Yikes.
And that's an issue.
So
that we
are
haven't
you
grappled with.
boycotting those companies, Jeff? I know you're screaming, but
Hey, it's just the mic's loud. Stop getting excited. I'm not screaming.
I'm screaming.
Those are the words you used. I said, you know, I would be screaming. So I'm like, I'm.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I got you. Well played.
So I'll put it this. I'll say this. I was involved recently with somebody who was looking for money and for a company, and they were thinking of going to Saudi Arabia, and I said, please don't. Now, not that my opinion mattered, but I stood and said, I think that's the wrong thing to do. That's as far as I go. Now, should those companies be boycotted because they got money before Khashoggi was murdered? Well, Saudi Arabia was doing bad things before that. But now, if they took money from Saudi Arabia, after that, yeah, I'd have a bit of a fit. But I also heard somebody else I know. So you're not into real
politics, basically.
I heard somebody else who took money from Saudi Arabia and justified it, saying, I'm using it for my ends. I've got no strings. I used it. Then you go to MIT and Epstein money. You know, there's everything in life has some kind of moral decision, which I think is what Leo is saying. And we can come to different decisions about it. It just so happens we agree this time, which I want in the history books.
When I struggle with this because I struggle with the whole world political stuff, because I spend most of my time thinking about what's happening in my backyard. And this story with China, it is very serious, but I can't personally wrap my head around it, especially when we go outside and see all the homeless and issues outside and the PG&E. I mean, we have so many political and corporate issues right here in our backyard. And I'm thinking, why not we just clean our backyard up first before hopping over?
But does that mean we don't, Ant, does that mean we don't, though, still deal with these? We can't, that's not a license to say, well, go ahead and support China. It's maybe all the more reason to say that we have to question ourselves at every turn.
Here's my thought on this. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. This country was born on some values, some real values. And I don't think that's mythology. I think that's true.
I agree.
And it's because the people who were in this country came here from other countries to flee discrimination. Now, admittedly, we are also founded on slavery, so there's other issues. We're not perfect.
Nope.
But I think that the foundational documents and the foundational ideas of this country are something to be celebrated. And it is, as a result, it's become a country people come to because they believe in that and they want to live that. Do we live up to it? Absolutely not.
We don't.
But you have to.
American dream,
if you ever hope to live up to the American dream and the dream as proposed by our founding documents, our founding fathers, and those ideals, you got to keep those firmly in front of you so you have a pole star to steer towards. Are we perfect? Far from it.
Nah.
We never have been. And there are many things we need to work on, but I think we all agree, we should, I hope, maybe we don't, all agree on the notion of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. There are certain things that are foundational, and until we can all say, yes, that's our goal, we'll never solve these problems. And part of the reason we're having trouble solving problems right now is there seems to be this real fragmentation of what our hopes and fears are for this country. And
I think it's because we haven't answered some of that. Like, we came here, for sure, in the pursuit of a specific type of religious freedom, which was actually intolerant to Quakers and to other religions, Catholics. So And in the process, we also demonized an entire nation of people who were already living here.
Well, the indigenous people got slaughtered, and then we brought in people from Africa to do our dirty work.
So
yes, there's all sorts of examples of how it's failed, but that doesn't mean we're never going to succeed unless we have a set of ideals that we're aiming for, right?
Right, but those ideals never match up against the practical realities.
No, because we're human.
So do we stop trying?
But well, no, we shouldn't stop trying. But we also, when Apple pulls this stuff or when Google pulls this stuff in response to China, it makes sense. I'm not outraged. I'm not surprised. I'm like, oh, this is what's going to happen because that is the American.
So
it makes sense to you where I'm sort of indifferent. I'm indifferent on it when this stuff happens.
See, so what you're saying, Stacey, is instead of freedom, equality.
Those are not our values. That's what we say our values are. Our values are.
But you're saying, all right,
fittest.
so I give up. Let's make our values be make as much money as possible. Let's be a Adam Smith free market capitalist economy.
No.
I don't
I'm
think that's.
not saying that at all. I'm just saying we have to recognize that we say this, but this is what we do.
We are capitalists.
Yes, we're human beings.
So when we try to do better, you say, well, don't bother.
We're not trying to do better. We're asking China and Apple to do better. We're not trying to do better. We're just asking these other companies to do better.
Not supporting autocratic dictators.
How do you know I'm not trying to do better? I'm trying to do better.
Okay, well, good.
Notice we're talking about this, even if China pulls our podcasts from. I mean, I don't know how you would say we're not trying to do this. I don't exploit our employees.
That good.
Right, Karsten? Right, Karsten?
I might mock them.
Somebody untie Karsten so we can answer the question.
Hold on, he can't speak yet.
His hands are chained to the oars. He can't. Never mind.
I can't say anything right now.
I appreciate that. Okay, yes, that is true. And I think it's hard to...
You could fire me at any moment.
Yeah, it's an at-will state. Don't forget it. That's right.
It's easy to say that we're aspiring to these values. It's hard to do. And when
all
those
I'm saying
values
is let's try to live up to them. Are you saying let's just not even try?
Most of the time tries, but when push comes to shove,
she's saying that they do try.
It gets real.
You've just given up, Stacey.
They go for this.
You've given up.
Well, let me
ask you, have you given up?
It's not giving up.
It's being a nihilist is giving up.
It's getting real.
No, that's called nihilism.
Let me try to say it the way that Siva Vaidyanathan says it. So this is, I think Siva right now would agree with Stacey.
I love Siva. If he says it, I agree with it.
Well, no, Siva and I disagree about everything, but I love him. Siva, Stacey, the way Siva argues with me about this exact point, what he says is, Jarvis, you're expecting too much of a company to be virtuous. A company is a company.
No, that's
what
right.
it is.
They're not human.
That's it.
That's
right.
It.
I agree.
Yeah. So is that what you're saying? Kind of like we're expecting too much of Apple?
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
These are companies. They've got. Yes, these are organizations that are built upon a profit-seeking.
So then, what is our remedy if we feel like they're like Amazon misusing
communism?
What is
like China?
So what is our remedy if Amazon mistreats its employees? What is our remedy?